Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, another Pops Project of the Month. Welcome to another Pops Project of the Month. Today, I'll be making a Santoku style chef's knife. This design will be kind of a Western take on the Japanese chef's knife. This is a little closer to the Japanese approach than some of the European commercial Santoku style blades that you might see from, Wusthof or those kind of commercial manufacturers, but it's not quite fully Japanese either. It'll have some really exciting features, as well as being more or less the US debut of a very special steel from Sheffield, England, which, as any knife nerd knows, is the cradle of the English cutlery and steel business. As always, our Pops Project of the Month is sponsored by Pops Knife Supplies. Most of the supplies I'll use during this build are available from Pops, so if you're interested in making this project yourself, you don't have to go chasing all over rounding up supplies for the build. Alright, let's jump in. As I alluded, the core of this build is a brand new high carbon steel fresh off the boat called Sheffcut that's exclusive to Pops. And when I say fresh off the boat, I mean it. This piece of Sheffcut literally came from the first load off the boat from England about 3 weeks ago. Pops is the only place in the US that's got it. By the way, that's chef as in Sheffield, not chef as in the guys at the restaurant with the white apron. Anyway, we'll get into some of the details in a minute, but trust me, this is a really cool steel. It has a bit of a Japanese inspiration, and that's part of the reason for the Japanese-inspired blade that I'll be making today. I'll begin by laying out the design. I've showed a ton of different ways of laying out blade designs over the years, but one of the easiest is just to draw the design to scale on a piece of paper. Once you're happy with that, cut it out with a knife, then trace it onto the blade. In this case, I'm using layout fluid and a scribe, but you can also do it with a Sharpie. Then it's over to the grinder. If you're new to grinding, this is pretty simplistic work. Just hog off everything that's not shaped like a knife. Here's a little trick though. You can use your tracking knob to hang the belt off one side of the platen or the other, and that helps us really dig in and get maximum grinding efficiency. Hanging the belt off the side like this allows you to be more aggressive, and because it folds in a little, you're both maximizing the amount of abrasive pressure and you're avoiding stripping fabric off the side of the belt, which can totally wreck your belt. While we're grinding, let me mention one of the cool things about Sheffcut. This steel is already normalized and ready to quench. You just grind it and bam, straight into the heat treating oven with no need for any complicated thermal cycling before the quench. This will be a hidden tang knife, as is traditional with virtually all Japanese knives. This results in extremely light, nimble, easy to use knives. The main feature of the Santoku is that it has a steep drop toward the point and a relatively flat edge, so it excels at slicing and chopping. Quick note, today's video is of course sponsored by Pops Knife Supplies. Pops has everything you need for knife making, steel for both stock removal guys and hammer bangers, obviously including the Sheffcut that we're using today, plus a huge supply of woods, bone, horn, antler, tons of cool micarta, including Pops' specialty, vintage micarta, all sorts of abrasives, including every kind of belt you can think of, sandpaper like I'll be showing today, specialty abrasives, fasteners, tools, you name it. And as I always mention, all 4 partners at Pops are pro knife makers, so if you need a little guidance on what kind of belt or steel or sandpaper or whatever it is that's right for the knife that you're making, there are folks on hand to help you figure out exactly what you need. popsknife.supplies. Now it's on to grinding the bevels. I won't lie, bevels on chef's knives can be a challenge. My strategy is always to blast away with heavy 35 grit belts without worrying as much about perfect grind lines as I might on a Hunter or some other beefier knife. And then I just clean up all the lines at the end with higher grit belts. But look, if you're having trouble with grinding bevels on chef's knives, here are some tips. First, back off on the speed a little. I run at the maximum practical speed for the grinder, but I've been doing this for decades. Nobody's going to laugh at you for taking your foot off the gas. That's why you got the variable speed control in the first place. Don't have a grinder with variable speed? Jump up a grit, maybe 60, 80, even 120. Look, you'll go slower, but that gives you more time to fix your mistakes and gives you cleaner grinds. That raises a key point about grinding, especially on challenging grinds. Very few people get everything perfect in one pass. There's always some tinkering at the end to make sure everything's right. If you haven't tried them already, I highly recommend 3M's Gator Grit Trizac belts for finishing. They're really forgiving and predictable. By the way, you might notice that the knife in this video seems to change size and shape occasionally. That's because it's actually two knives, one a hair longer than the other. And if you're interested in picking up one of the blades made for this video, check tacticsarmory.com. Also, if you're interested in doing the blade at home and you want to have some plans to work off of, plans for almost all my builds are available to all my supporters on Patreon. Check patreon.com/Walter Sorrells for details, cards, and description. Anyway, on this project, I'm doing a little bit of an experiment. Joey at Pops sent me this clay material for making jamones. It's New Claire Jamon 1800. I've always used a high temperature cement called Satanite, but this product is specifically formulated for jamones, so I'm going to try it out, see how it fares. Here I'm laying out the clay. I'm going about this more or less the way I'd normally do it on one of my Japanese style blades, so it'll undoubtedly take a little tinkering to dial this new product in, but having used more or less jury-rigged products most of my career, I'm really psyched to be trying something specifically made for the job. There's no mixing, no fussing around getting the consistency right. Just open the jar and start applying it. It's very consistent. It's a little thinner than what I would normally use, but the key point is that it goes on really cleanly and predictably with no lumps or runny spots. If you haven't done the jamon thing before, you always want to go into heat treat with the clay fully dried or it'll just boil right off the surface once it heats up. So if you're in a rush, and I'm kind of running up against a deadline here, you can always speed up the clay by hitting it with a propane torch or a heat gun. Boom, dry. So as we get ready to heat treat, let's talk a little bit about the Sheffcut steel I'm using for this project. Pops partnered with ground flat stock of Sheffield, England to bring a high carbon steel somewhat analogous to Japanese white paper steel, or sort of a spiced up version of 26C3 steel for those of you who are familiar with that. Anyway, it weighs in at around 1.3% carbon, relatively low manganese, and with a dab of niobium and some other alloying elements. You can get the Google data sheet if you want more info, but anyway, I'm eager to see how it takes a jamon. It's supposed to be capable of very high hardness, which will make it fantastic for a chef's knife. Per the instructions of the guys at Pops, I'll hold it for about 10 minutes at 1475, then quench in Parks 50, a fast quenching oil. After tempering for 2 hours at 350 Fahrenheit, we're ready to move on to the handles. I'm going to be doing traditional-ish two-part handles. I say traditional-ish because one will be made from Purple Heart and Curly Cherry, but the other will be made from vintage micarta, along with a nice piece of zebra wood that I've been holding on to for like 20 years now. As I slice and dice these on the bandsaw, let me mention that there are a ton of different ways to make these types of handles. The Sheffcut stock I'm using here is 1/8 inch, so we can mill or drill the smaller thickness sections of the handle, the bolster sort of sections, with 1/8 inch tools. Don't despair if you don't have a mill. I'll show you some other techniques as we go. If you drill them out, then you can use a jeweler's saw and a file to open up the hole. I will not lie, milling's a lot easier though. For the sort of bolster section, I'll be using 2 pieces of 3/8 inch vintage micarta, which should be a pretty cool look. Now we'll open up a channel for the second, longer section of the handle. You can mill it like I'm doing here, or you can score around the edges with a knife and chisel it out. This is really not hard to do with a small, sharp chisel. You can do both sides, you can do one side, dealer's choice. With everything staged and ready for the handles, we'll go back to the blades. After heat treatment, I had a small warp in the edge. That's very common when you do hamones on thin blades like this, but I provided a little wiggle room so everything will work out fine. Pre-heat treat, I ground the blades to about 30 thousandths at the edge. I'll now work that down to about 15 thou at the edge, and in the process get rid of that little warp section. Now that the blade's been heat treated, we have to work pretty slowly to avoid overheating the blade. So I'll just go in and out of the water bucket a lot, backing down the speed a little, and just overall trying not to get impatient. Obviously, if you overheat the blade at this point, you can ruin the heat treat and basically have to start from scratch. A quick detour to the filing guide, where I'll quickly clean up the edges where the tang meets the ricasso. Now look, I should have done this before heat treatment, but because I clayed up the tang, preventing it from hardening, everything works out fine. This Sheffcut is screaming hard steel, so if you don't clay up the tang, you can forget about filing anything after heat treat. Back at the grinder, I'll finish up with a Trizac 160 micron belt. So look, there are tons of legit ways to finish a knife. I'll be hand sanding these, so the main goal on the grinder is just to get a nice smooth finish in preparation for the hand sanding. Just to show you that there are many ways to skin the cat, you can use the flat platen or a rotary platen if you've got one of those, or a slack belt setup. Each one has subtle advantages and disadvantages and produces slightly different results. Try as many of them as you have gear or budget for and see what works best for you. I could spend all day talking about all the advantages and disadvantages, but we want to get moving here. And there we are, nice and clean looking. So you can stop right here if you want. There's nothing wrong with a belt finish knife, but I'll be a masochist and move on to hand sanding for a real finished look. For the hand sanding, I'll be using Indasa Redline sandpaper. The guys at Pops are all knife makers, so they try everything they sell and they just rave about this stuff. Another cool thing that they do with this particular brand of sandpaper is that they assemble sheets into multi-packs of various grits. So that way you can get 50 sheet variety packs of a high or a low grit assortment, and that's really just super handy. Anyway, I'm just taping 220 grit sandpaper onto a surface plate and blasting away till my hands hurt. And then I keep going some more, because quitting ain't an option. Now, switching over to the sanding block to get a really clean, smooth surface. Sometimes, with my swords for instance, I'll run way up to very, very high grits at this point. But in this case, I'm stopping at 600, which still gives a very nice finish that's actually just perfect for kitchen knives. As you can see, the hamon is really starting to pop out now. Like I said, I'll be monkeying around with this nuclear hamon clay some more to get it fully dialed in, but so far so good. Then a quick etch in very dilute ferric chloride, followed by a polish with my favorite metal polish to remove most of the oxides that darken up the steel. And I'm ready to assemble. After a little swearing and wrestling, we've got everything set. I'm using 30-minute epoxy, which I much prefer over the quick set 5-minute variety that you get down at Home Depot. It just allows you to do everything in a much more relaxed way and really get everything right without worrying about it all hardening up on you before you got everything the way you want it. Next day, off come the clamps, and I'll head to the grinder to profile the handle. A little hand sanding. A quick application of wax. And there it is, ready for the kitchen. Now this is a thin, very light, very pleasant knife to use. Doesn't look too bad either. Like I said, if you're interested in picking up either of the knives that I made today, check my Tactics Armory website. And other than a couple of pieces of wood, pretty much everything that I used today came from Pops. You need it, they got it. What more can I say? All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.